Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast number 123. I know we are still late again this month. Promised to get that caught up, but we're just taking a couple months to do that. But let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the amazing guest that we have here for this month, Dr. Eva Krakow. We read her research and her blog on Psychology Today, which will be in the show notes. You definitely need to check it out because it's all about decision making. It's just really an amazing, amazing blog called Stretching Theory. But she does a lot of research into how we make decisions. How do hoaxes or fake news affect our decisions? And what can we do about it? This is going to be a really great show. So let me get Eva on now and let's start the conversation. We are back with our guest, Eva Krakow. Nice to have you on the show today.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me.
So let's start off with a little bit of information about you. Maybe you could tell us who you are and what your area of research is and how you got into it.
Absolutely. So I'm an assistant professor in psychology, and I'm based at the University of Leicester, which is about 1 hour's drive from London. So I'm based in the UK. I mainly do research on judgment and decision making. So basically, I'm interested how we can improve our daily choices. And a most recent focus of mine has been how to make better choices about medication and about the kind of medical care that we receive. So that's a particular area of mine. But obviously, me being a scientist and an academic, I kind of want to break out a little bit and be a bit more than your average scientist, so to speak. So I'm very aware that a lot of my colleagues are kind of stuck in that little academic bubble, and it's kind of difficult to break out of that isolation. I think science is so much about communicating and learning. So it's about communicating with non-specialists as well. So I'm actually really glad you invited me to the podcast because I love participating in things like this. I do a lot of blogging. So I think this is a great opportunity. Thank you.
First of all, I'm so excited with your opening statements because one of our focuses as social engineers, so in the security field, and we focus on the human side of security, is trying to understand how people make decisions. Because after it's over, you look at someone who fell for a phishing email or for a phone scam, and it seems so obvious. But during the moment, you can realize that anyone can be vulnerable to these things.
Absolutely, yeah.
So understanding how they make that decision to buy into that particular attack, to me, is one of the vital pieces of helping fix the problem. So how do you actually study how people make decisions?
So there are a lot of different approaches, I have to say. So I've done a whole range of different studies on this, including some experiments, some qualitative pieces as well. Maybe one of my most relevant experiments I can outline here. So what we did was we asked participants to take part in a little game, so like a little interaction with another person. And we manipulated the wording of the task instructions to see, how that affected how people made choices in that game situation. And what I need to mention here is that they were motivated or incentivized by money. So any choice they made had a really big effect on them and what they might earn after completing the game, basically. So what we found was that the mere framing of the messages, and this is a scientific term, framing, it basically refers to the wording of the messages, can have huge effects on people's behavior. So when we presented the game as like a friendly piece of teamwork, for example, people were a lot more cooperative and kind of worked together a lot more. Whereas if we use the wording beating the other person, people suddenly became really competitive. And it was just fascinating to see, how much the kind of context of a message, how much the framing, subtle differences like that can really influence people's behavior. And obviously this has huge implications for the real world and how we make choices on a website design, for example.
What is the name of that piece of research? Because that has some major implications in our field here.
Yes, absolutely. So this is a study on framing effects, which we conducted on a specific game, which is called the Centipede game. I'm very happy to provide the link to it afterwards, actually.
Yes. So the aspect of framing is something we talk about all the time.
Yes.
Because what you'll notice is if you look back like 5 years, let's say in the phishing world, the PH phishing email attacks, you see that there was a lot of spelling errors and grammar errors and, I am a prince from Nigeria, those kinds of things. And now you jump forward and the message is clear and clean and written perfectly and with the proper logos and
Yes.
it sounds legit, which the framing of the message has become so much more professional, it's harder to realize.
Absolutely. Well, firstly, I have to say about this, yes, it is true that these messages have become more sophisticated, but even back in the day, a lot of people vote for the hoaxes, even when they contained all these errors and so on.
They did.
So, yes, we have to obviously consider the implications. If they fell for those messages that contained all the little spelling errors and typos and so on, what does that mean for the messages that are sent out now, or these phishing emails that are so close to the original, really? How can we actually protect ourselves? It's a really important question.
So, in the end of it, with that Centipede game, what kind of framing did you find worked the best to get the desired response?
Well, that's an interesting question because you already mentioned here a desired response. Now, what is a desired response? It obviously depends on the situation, doesn't it? So obviously with this particular piece of work, we wanted to induce more cooperation and more teamwork, but it will completely obviously depend on the context and what is actually desirable in that context. So sometimes you might just want to make sure that everybody does the best for themselves. So in that sense, you would have to frame it more in terms of, how to look out for themselves, how to make sure the individual comes out best afterwards. So really, I think there's a bit of an ethical issue here. You have to define what the desirable question is, the desirable answer is, before actually then deciding on the best framing for it.
That is a great point, and obviously thought out like a researcher. So what was the desired response in your area of research? Was it for them to make more money individually, or was it to be more empathetic and share?
Yes, so actually maybe even a bit of both. So in the end of the day, we wanted them to be happy with their outcome in the game. Now, the interesting thing is actually that people do have different preferences, and this is what we call social value orientation. So this type of orientation refers to individual differences when it comes to the distribution of money or resources. And it has been found that there are stable differences, almost you might think of it as personality traits, where some people prefer to share money or resources more equally with others, and they are most happy when the team does well, whereas some people are happier when they look out for themselves and get the most for themselves. So in that sense, we wanted to actually find out how these stable preferences interacted with decisions in the game, because it's very interesting. People do have different preferences just setting out, and these will then obviously interact with whatever message frame you put on top of it, basically.
That's fascinating. So that it sounds to me like that piece of research blended with, I'm not sure if you ever read Dr. Paul Zach's research into oxytocin.
Oh, yes. That's some fascinating stuff, yeah.
Right. I mean, and how he did a similar study with a game and trying to see how he can elicit oxytocin and that trust and that feeling of rapport by making people more giving. I think, man, blend those two together. If you could figure out what framing makes people more empathetic and giving, and then blend that with his research to make, you can almost change a whole society with that.
Yes, obviously the research on oxytocin it's almost at a different level, because that's almost like looking at the neurological level. So you're right. I mean, it's about combining all these different areas to come up with the most conclusive result, I think.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So if we look at the way the society is today, like I know one of your areas, and from what I read about your research, was into hoaxes or fake news. And we see so much of that. I mean, when I don't know the statistics, so I'm not going to try to quote it, but I read some report about how it's an overwhelming number of people in the 18 to 30-year-old range are getting their news from places like Facebook or other social media sites. So in a world where our society, the next generation, are coming up and growing up and getting their knowledge from a site like Facebook, which has no quality control and seems to have all these issues with these kinds of things, how do we figure out how much of an effect hoaxes or fake news have on us?
Yeah, very good question. So you already mentioned Facebook. I think I just want to outline a couple of more issues that come into play here. So not only is there obviously a lack of quality control, so anybody can post whatever they like, but in addition to that, you also have all those kind of this massive network of different actors involved, and a lot of them might actually be fake actors. You don't know who they are, because anybody can just create their own profile. So in that sense, it's very difficult when you interact with someone else on social media to really read them properly and really be able to understand their intentions. So a lot of the kind of common signs that can kind of point you towards whether a statement is true or false. They no longer apply. So, for example, in real face-to-face interactions, you would pay a lot of attention to the other person's gestures, to their facial expressions.
Yeah.
All of that is completely, it's just not applicable in that context. In addition to that as well, what a lot of people don't seem to realize is that the social media, not only do they have questionable quality of the articles, the information they provide, they also have a very targeted way of presenting you with those articles. So one main aim of social media is really to kind of keep you interested, keep you engaged, keep you on the site. And they will feed you quite strategically the contents that you are most likely to find interesting. So if you've previously liked an article basically on a political statement, then they will present you more articles that are similar like that. So it's kind of playing into what you want to read. And by that, you almost get that what we call false consensus effect. You believe that everybody believes.
Yeah, you're putting your own little shoebox and you never get out of it.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. And that is the very dangerous thing here, because you might kind of get stuck in your own little world and might be tempted into thinking that everybody thinks like you. And that is a very difficult, challenging place to be in, to be honest.
I mean, seriously, especially if your views could be so damaging, like based on prejudice or based on some form of hate of a different group.
Absolutely.
If you're constantly getting fed a belief system that says you're supported, that's almost feeding the fire of negativity and hate.
And, I think that's partly really responsible for why we were so shocked when the Brexit results came in, that the voting, because a lot of the people who did not vote Brexit were never aware of the high number of people who were in favour of the UK leaving the EU, simply because we have those different social networks that we use on a regular basis. And we hardly saw those articles, arguing in favour of Brexit. And it's almost like separate worlds sometimes. It's really fascinating, but also really scary at the same time.
I mean, okay, so I had like a soapbox moment because it was like, wow, that's just it feels so damaging to a society to just only feed people information that never expands your horizons, but only allows you to stay within your little circle. How do you fix that?
Well, I mean, firstly, you can make a conscious effort actually of stepping outside of your comfort zone and then trying to engage with other people, try to read from as many as possible, like different sources, basically. So if you've become aware that you've just been reading the same old stuff, then maybe it's time for you to actually seek additional resources, look at some print newspapers as well as just Facebook, for example, follow some other people on social media, follow some other people on Twitter. But obviously that will have to come from yourself as well, or possibly it has to be nudged by other people. So it can be quite difficult actually without any realization to change behavior. So it's better to actually, once you've got that awareness, you can change it. But if you're not even aware of it, it can be quite tricky.
Yeah, to me, I guess that's like the first step in a lot of things is you need to be self-educated and self-aware that there is potentially a problem. Otherwise, you can't even begin to think about how to fix it.
That's right, yes.
I think back, and I know this is an old story, but I think back to one of the first times I remember something truly fake really having a massive effect, and that was, I think, in 2013 when the Associated Press, which is a news organization here in the U.S., got hacked. Their Twitter got hacked, and they tweeted that there were 2 explosions in the White House, and the president at the time, which was Barack Obama, was injured. And the stock market dropped billions of dollars. I mean, it was like, I'll actually see if I can find the number, but I remember it being billions of dollars the next day because that went viral. And it was fake news, but it was fake news that didn't just scare people. It was fake news that affected actual jobs and a whole economy for the world.
Yes. I don't know whether you heard of this other example, actually. It was one that appeared a bit earlier, and that's why it was quite surprising, because it really hit us when we weren't really prepared for it at all. So I think it first appeared in the 1990s, late 1990s, when someone released a story about flesh-eating bananas. So by eating bananas, you were supposed to be able to contract necrotizing fasciitis. And then just based on that one story, which went viral, people stopped eating bananas. And that had a huge effect on African banana farmers.
Whoa.
It's absolutely crazy.
So, okay, I remember hearing that story and quickly dismissing. I did not know it had an effect on banana sales.
Absolutely, yeah, it had a big effect. It really spread like wildfire. And the surprising thing is that initial kind of hoax, it did contain a lot of errors and mistakes and little typos and so on. It just shows that even with a really poorly, structured message, you can still reach a lot of people. So, yeah. Bad
That
news
is
for us, I
really
guess.
scary, isn't it? That is
Absolutely.
really scary. Let's take a quick break from the show to talk about what's going on in the world of social engineer. Well, we are nearing the end of the year, and I don't even know about you, but what happened to 2019? I feel like it just started and we're already talking about 2020. 2020 is an exciting year for us. People, if you have not signed up for the February 20 through 22nd conference, the Human Hacking Conference in Orlando in February, the best weather ever, but with amazing people. I mean, we are talking, you just got to go check out the site, sevillage.org. Check it out. Sign up for that conference. The prices are great right now and they're about to go up. There's only 1,000 seats available. So you definitely want to get into this before it's full. It's going to be one of the most amazing social engineering events ever. And this is just year one. So come to the inaugural event, join me and the crew, and we'll be down there. Okay, now next. March 2020, we have our APSE class here in Orlando again. That is March 16th through the 20th, Advanced Practical Social Engineering. It's available on the site now. I think we're about a quarter full, so you still got time for that. If you were ever an APSE student, you should have gotten your invite for the master's level class. If you have not, there may be a second wave of invites going out, but there's only 2 seats left. And then another APSE class in Bristol, UK, 1 through 5 of June over in the beautiful city of Bristol. Wonderful time of the year to be in the UK, so you want to join us for that. Of course, we'll announce future conferences like DEF CON or Black Hat or other things as we get more information on those, but stay tuned for that. Check out sevillage.org. Feel free to check out innocentlivesfoundation.org too to see the work that we're doing on helping law enforcement catch child predators. You can, of course, continue to follow us on our other sites, but for now, let's get back to the show. And we think about, I'm guilty of this too. You get up in the morning and you go to check the news. I don't turn the television on to check news anymore. I go to Twitter. I go on my little news feed at my Google section, and I check out what's going on in the world. And that's the way I get my news.
Yes, you just do what's convenient.
Yeah, it's convenient. Right, exactly. And it's with us everywhere because it's on our phone.
Exactly, it's convenient. And the really interesting thing is that actually nobody can protect themselves. So there's some really interesting research showing that even the very bright people, so towards the upper end of the IQ spectrum, even those people for hoaxes and fake news, and maybe sometimes they're more likely even to fall for these hoaxes.
And why is that?
It's really fascinating, this. I recently came across this book by David Robson. It's called The Intelligence Trap, and he really outlines that argument in there really well. Basically, he says that when you're really that smart, you can think of your smart brain as like a very powerful car engine almost. So you're destined, or you're set up to go a lot faster than everybody else. However, when you're kind of going in the wrong direction, the speed doesn't actually help you at all, because once you're in the wrong direction, you just go faster into that one direction, and it's almost harder to kind of steer around that and get out of that wrong direction. So just to give you an example, once you've perhaps come up with a particular belief about a certain topic, might then use all your brain power to do more reading on it, but be quite strategic about the reading that you do. So you might be more likely to seek out confirming information. That's what we call the confirmation bias. And by then kind of, feeding into that existing belief, you then end up going completely off the track, basically, and just completely getting it wrong. So in that sense, a really high IQ can actually be a negative thing.
Is that linked to pride or arrogance, or is it really just that maybe more intelligent people feel they don't need to check because they're smart? Which I guess sounds like pride and arrogance, but
there's definitely an element of overconfidence there. So if someone has been told their entire life, that they're smart, they're doing well, they're well educated, they're getting it right, then they will have a certain level of confidence that they are right. So even just hunches or intuitive feelings or ideas might suddenly seem right to them, and they might argue for them a lot more than anybody else would. So they might not question their own judgment as much as they would question another person's judgment. And this is also referred to as the bias blind spot. So it basically means that highly intelligent people often are unable to recognize their own weaknesses, their own biases, their own limitations, and that's what makes them weak overall.
That's fascinating, and also interesting in the sense when you think about that one part where you said, like, if you have a belief system and you look for some information and you find a piece of information that supports what it is you're saying, that people stop searching.
Absolutely.
Because, well, I found it. I found my answer. So there it is. I must be right.
Absolutely. That's very motivated reasoning. You actually see it a lot on science as well. Once you have your hypothesis, you just want to find confirming evidence for it. And it can be tempting because you obviously want to be right. But yeah, it can be very dangerous because you don't see all the evidence out there and end up being completely wrong about something.
Yeah, I was going to ask that if that's, it sounds like it would be a massive threat within the science community, because you like you said, you're doing this research because you want to prove a point. And once you hit that point, we can stop now because we proved it.
Yes, it definitely is. It definitely is a barrier. Well, the good thing is, though, that obviously there's a whole community of researchers. So even if we don't believe that we've made a mistake, at least there's other people there to challenge you. So yeah. Other people might have different hypotheses and then actually do another experiment to kind of follow up on your findings. So in that sense, that can help, obviously, if you have a critical community. But yes, it's always a challenge if you're very motivated to just confirm an existing hypothesis.
So besides, let's talk about the normal everyday person. So not the researcher, not the scientist, but the everyday person who we know is relying too much on Facebook. Besides just being self-aware. So let's say, I don't know a percentage, but let's just say a large percentage of people are not. They're not self-aware. Then how do we start making a move to help fix this problem? I mean, I'm looking at it from like a security aspect where I just see daily people are falling for these scams, and social engineering, as far as human hacking, hasn't changed in the thousands of years that humans have been around. It hasn't changed at all. The only thing that's changed is the delivery mechanism because of technology. And it's not because people are stupid.
No.
It's really not. I believe that it's not because people are stupid, because I've fallen for these attacks and I don't feel that I'm terribly stupid. So how do we start to make a shift to educate properly?
Yes, well, that's a really big issue, obviously. And it will have, like you said, it will have to almost come from above, like from some sort of higher organization, because people are often not self-aware. So what I've seen a lot actually in the UK, which I've been finding really helpful, is that when banks noticed increasing number of phishing emails that actually were really successful in people revealing their PIN codes to their bank accounts and so on, they started sending a lot more informative emails or messages to the general public to firstly let them know that they would never ask for a password in an online email, like in an online context outside of the actual login portal, and then also showing them what their usual logos and email formats and so on look like. So actually helping to almost educate the people of how they can spot when something is a bit fishy. And I think it's obviously in the interest of the banks to do so, because they don't want to have any more fraud issues. But that's a really good example of how someone who's got a bit more power in that sense, a bit more reach and a bit more scope to actually make a difference.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think the uphill battle that we at least see is to have then the end consumer willing to be educated, right? We find a lot of times, because we get, every day we get paid by companies to come and help educate their folks, to actually fish their folks so they know what it feels like and things like that. And you get these, sometimes within an organization that is so open-minded, you get these group of people that just hate you for what you're doing, and they don't want to be educated. They don't think it's worth the time. And I think falsely, a lot of people have this thought, well, who cares about my bank account? Who wants to hack me? I'm a nobody.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. You get those people as well.
Yeah.
And that's obviously a whole new challenge there. I think firstly, it's always important, obviously, to highlight their personal incentive. So why would they need to care? And but yes, there is an argument that perhaps the kind of common consumer wouldn't think they would ever be the victim of such an attack. But then perhaps giving them numbers and actually giving examples of when this has happened to other people like them, that would be helpful to actually get them more involved. And then in cases where education simply does not work, I'm sure you will have come across this, a more subtle approach, which is called nudging, has been become increasingly more popular and useful actually in this sense.
I love what you just said about finding out. I'm going to probably word it differently than you did, but not on purpose, just because I forgot the exact quote. But finding out what is the motivator for the person. Why?
Exactly,
I think you said why would they care? It's like reframing the whole education piece is really what you're suggesting.
Yes, you need a certain angle. You need to make sure they're actually interested in what you're saying. So I previously mentioned some of my research interests when it comes to medical decision making. So a lot of that area, people are not naturally interested. I think it's very difficult to think about complex medication needs and so on. So you have to make sure you lead when you provide information, you lead with that incentive straight away. Why do they need to worry about this? Why is it important to them? Because people are busy. And that's, in the end of the day, that's the reason why maybe they're not always very good at seeking out the right information, because they choose the convenient online platforms and they choose what seems comfortable to them. So kind of making it relevant to them is really what's crucial here.
Sometimes I think the most genius things sound so simple that we kind of pass over them. But I really believe you may have hit on something here that's truly genius, because if you think about it, I can see people in my industry, including myself, falling for this trap. So we say, hey, why should they care? Well, they should care because everyone's getting hacked. But that's not a good answer. It's not a good answer because maybe that answer is not really the motivator for that group of people to care, just because the world is getting hacked and they still are thinking, who cares about me? So that's not a great answer to go that route. You really have to find out what is the motivator for that person. Is it family? Is it money? Is it their job? Is it happiness? Is it long-term, success? What is their motivator? And that's when you could start building the right education.
Yes. And you can see that in a lot of different areas. So you mentioned hacking, but when we think about climate change, that's another issue that's so important, obviously, to our future. And it's all about how communicate the risks so that they are relevant to the individual. Because, when you talk about an abstract future threat that nobody really believes in, that's not going to be a big motivator for people. You have to make it really applicable to them and possibly put it in the context of their own family to actually achieve a difference.
Yeah, that's powerful. We recently were talking to a company that decided to take a different slant on their security awareness education. And instead of talking to people about why they should protect the company and the business and their work emails, they started giving them education on how to keep their kids safe online, on how to check their home computers for viruses, on how to make sure they're using the ATM properly. And what they found was by making people more security conscious, they were able to create security conscious people within their workspace, which meant that they weren't just more security conscious at home, it was everywhere they were.
Because you will apply your skills to other areas, definitely.
Right. I was so happy to be working with that company because it was like, it really was a pivotal moment where you said, yeah, you're going to spend money to make these people better, not at work, but eventually, and eventually being short term, it's going to make them better at work.
Exactly. Another area actually that I'm particularly interested in, I don't know whether you've come across this, but it's again within the kind of medical area, is how people make decisions about antibiotics use. So a huge problem at the moment is the kind of increasing risk of antibiotic resistance, which basically means that drugs suddenly lose their efficacy. So the more we use antibiotics, the less they work, basically. And this is a massive issue. It's been compared to climate change in a sense. That's people saying that once we run out of drugs that work, we will start dying again from like really simple diseases and infectious diseases and so on, and it will have a massive influence on mankind. Now, there has been a lot of communication about this topic, but a lot of it, I think, has really missed the point because people really talk about this abstract threat, so similar to climate change or similar what you said, to overall risk to the company. But what has been shown is, people don't, in the end of the day, they don't really care that much about the overall community, the overall, the world, the company, whatever. They care about themselves, how they're going to manage in their daily lives. So part of my research actually now looks at how we can communicate about the really horrible potential effects of antimicrobial resistance so that people, make it relevant to themselves and then end up no longer over-consuming antibiotics to create a better future, basically.
Do you find in that area of research that people tend to care less because, well, when that happens, it's going to be 100 years from now and I'll be long dead anyway.
Absolutely. So one of the things is that it is perceived as a future threat. It's a thing that's not very visible to people. So, it's not something they can measure. If you're not a doctor, for example, you probably don't know much about it anyway. So how can you actually perceive it? How does it become tangible to you? So it's a massive issue. People just don't take it seriously. They don't believe in it, and they think they might probably be dead by the time that happens. And in that case, it's very important to point out that even now, many people are already dying because of the consequences of resistant drugs. And even if they're not worried about their own health, they have to think about their children's health and so on. So there's always a way of kind of spinning it to make it more relevant to the individual, I believe.
That's an interesting topic because, like you said, if you're not a doctor, you never really hear about it. But I've always wondered to myself, it seems like every year they come out with some flu vaccine and then the flu figures out how to bypass it. So they have to come out with something new. It's the first time, like in my, not being ever in the medical field, but having kids and then growing up with those kids, always realizing, man, like how does a virus get smarter? How does that happen? How does a sickness understand to make itself resilient to the thing that we just came up with to kill it? It was always a fascinating topic and a little scary.
It's a really difficult topic.
Yeah.
People, like you said, people wouldn't necessarily engage with the topic, and they might even be a bit scared about it because they feel like they might not be educated enough. But it's important to even those issues, bring them across in a language that people will understand and at least realize that it's important to them after all. So that's why, I do believe this is a very important area.
It's interesting. It all kind of comes back again to your original statements about reframing and how
exactly.
if we learn how to reframe our communications, we may get these very complex issues, whether it's security, whether it's antibiotics, whether it's medication, we may be able to get them across to everyone so much simpler.
But it's doing the research behind it, actually. So what we find is that in a lot of cases, organizations actually develop certain messages or information materials. I find this actually in the medical area again. I find a lot of people kind of produce these information leaflets, but then we find, they haven't been based on any research. They haven't been properly tested. And a lot of the people don't understand the language that's in them. And that just feels like, it's wasted efforts, basically. Clearly, the intentions behind it were good, but you need to make sure that you use all the kind of insights from science to make sure that the wording is quite right and hits the right spot.
That's fascinating. Eva, this has been such a great conversation. And, what I love about interviewing people like you is like not in the field of our field at all, but yet there's so much application cross fields.
Absolutely. There's so much crossover. It's fascinating.
It is. It fascinates me. And it constantly, I've been doing this for 10 years, inviting people on this show that have very little to do with security in the world. And yet every time being fascinated with how much crossover there is in their area of research, the thing that they've looked into, the things that they spent their life studying, and then go, wow, that has direct application to what I've been doing for the last decade.
Just shows we need to talk to each other.
It does. I agree with that 100%. And those open, reframed conversations, I believe, can make such a huge difference. I had the fascination of getting a chance to work with Dr. Paul Ekman on a few projects. And he had this wonderful concept, which, now he's up in years and I'm not sure if he's still working on it, but of creating a video game that reframed the delivery mechanism for children, where instead of getting that dopamine drip for killing someone, they get rewarded for doing something amazing. Something better, something empathetic, something wonderful. And I know he was trying to figure out how can we research that. And I just listening to all your areas of research, it just seems like that would be such a fascinating piece to blend all of this together. All the things that you and Dr. Zach and Dr. Ekman, all you great minds getting together and creating these things that can really make a change.
That could be your future project. Definitely.
So I'm sure people are going to want to know more about you. Where can they follow you or find out about your work or find out about things that you're doing?
Yes, so I do obviously have a website at the University of Leicester, but what I would really like to promote here actually is my personal blog. So I write a regular decision-making blog for Psychology Today, where I discuss all things related to decision-making and also try to put in a few personal insights as well here and there. So yeah, if you're interested in anything that I've been talking about and a little bit more, email, that's the perfect place to go, I believe. So the blog is called Stretching Theory, and you could just find it by going onto the main Psychology Today website. And if not, I am on Twitter as well. I actually really enjoy kind of just connecting with people I've never heard of before. Like I said in my intro, I think it's so important as a scientist to reach out and to connect with people and to talk about your science and, disseminate it. So yeah, if they want to follow me on Twitter, just look for my name, and I'd be so happy to engage in conversations on there.
That is awesome. And I'm going to actually find the link to your blog, and I'll put it in the show notes, because that decision making is probably one of the biggest things that we talk about in our community, and having some actual psychology behind it and research that you've done can really be helpful. I'm sure people will enjoy that stretching theory. One of the things we always ask our guests too is, because we have a lot of readers, people who listen to this podcast love to read. We have an ongoing 10-year list of books, and they don't have to be books that if anything we talked about, it could just be something you read that you enjoyed. But if you have one or two book recommendations of things that you read that you enjoyed, we'd love to put them in our list.
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, I actually have a confession to make. So I hardly ever read books for pleasure anymore these days, because I read so much at work. What I do
I'm the same way.
I feel really bad about this, just admitting it, to be honest. But what I do is I listen to audiobooks instead. So that's something.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's something I've discovered over the years, actually, because my eyes get tired. I don't have the concentration when I get home after a long day of work of just, reading articles and so on. So what I do a lot is, firstly, I walk a lot, and when I walk, I listen to audiobooks, and I think that's a fascinating way of actually almost getting a bit closer to the piece of writing. And it can help you, even like when the narrator or the person reading the book has fantastic acting skills as well. I think you can just connect on such a different level with a book. So I found that that really helps for me.
I agree.
Now, regarding some specific recommendations, I'm not sure if you've come across this. You must be familiar with the comedian Trevor Noah. He's the host of The Daily Show. Honestly, I came across it by accident, to be honest. I hadn't actually heard of it. It came up on my recommendations on Audible, the site that I use for my audiobooks. And after, I was so positively surprised by it. So it was the most hilarious account of him growing up as a little boy, mixed race boy in apartheid South Africa. So that was a really challenging thing to go through, really. But the way he describes it is just hilarious. So he's actually the narrator of the book himself. And
is he too?
Yeah,
wow.
So you can imagine that he will present it in a really, really funny way. Even though it is still like I'm not sure I would describe it as a comedy, but it obviously has funny elements to it. It also covers some very, very important political and historical issues. So anybody who's kind of interested in, kind of racial issues and political challenges in South Africa, I would definitely recommend that book. It's hilarious.
So is that the one? I think I haven't read it, but I think I heard this before. So it's the
Born a Crime,
right? Yeah, okay.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm going to put that down.
Good title as well, because very interesting. Even though, obviously, he's in South Africa, he really stood out as a mixed race boy because he had a white dad, and that made him not belong anywhere because he was neither completely black nor completely white, and it just created so many challenges for him. It's really fascinating.
Wow. Yeah, that is fascinating. That's a great recommendation, and also a really interesting one considering our discussion about like reframing our decisions and things like that. So I think it fits quite well.
Well, I'm glad you say that.
Yeah, I appreciate this interview so much. It was really great
glad you say that.
Getting to know you and talk to you.
Thank you for giving me the chance to participate in it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Another great podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to Eva. It just sounds, again, I keep saying this, but I'm just amazed when I talk to someone who's in a completely different field and to see how much it works for us. Just truly fascinating. And how much crossover there is between framing and decision making. I'm fascinated by her research and I can't wait to see what she comes up with next. Just a couple housekeeping. If you want to follow us, it's Human Hacker for me, SOC Engineer Inc. for the corporation, and SE Village for all things to do with SE Village, of course. Our Innocent Lives is innocent.org on Twitter. And of course, you can get all of our websites by going to social-engineer.org, social-engineer.com, sevillage.org, and innocentlivesfoundation.org. Stay tuned for Innocent Lives because this month we're launching an amazing auction. That's all I'm going to say. But you're definitely going to want to get involved in that. So keep checking the website out for that information. I guess that's about it. Who will we have next month? let's see. But until then, see ya.